Hello and welcome. This is elttraining.com and I'm Joga Conga. And this month's video is on another aspect of classroom management, and we're going to look at classroom interaction patterns. We're going to look at Teacher Echo and also at what's called IRF. More about that later. So let's start with Teacher Echo. So what we mean by this is when the teacher repeats something that's been said in the classroom, usually by the learners. I have one of my students to thank here, so Lotus Bishin. She's been doing some research into this and it made me think about it again in a new way, and some of these examples are hers, so thank you, Lotus. So the first question really is this one: why do teachers do this? Sometimes this might be for clarity. The teacher might repeat what the teacher has said to clarify things, to ensure that learners have understood things. Here's an example. I want you to get into pairs. Yes, pairs, two together. And maybe you gesture and show them what you mean. So in this case, you could argue that's Teacher Echo, the teacher echoing themselves, but there's a really good reason for it. Learners don't speak the language very well and you want to ensure that they have understood. Fair enough. Sometimes it's for very authentic use too. Here's an example. What did you do at the weekend? It is Grandma's birthday. Is she 100? 100? Wow! And is she still healthy? Now, here clearly you've echoed what the learner has said, but this is in a completely appropriate manner. This is very normal. You'd say this to your friends in exactly the same way. So I think this is really authentic use, and I think there's no issue with this for me at all. There are also other issues which are more teacherly, perhaps, like this. The learner says stick. Stick? What stick? Says the teacher, trying to negotiate meaning here. Stick. S-T-E-A-K. Oh, steak. So this kind of negotiation of meaning, again, I think is completely reasonable, authentic and fine. Don't have a problem with anything like this. But there's another kind of teacher echo that's commonly found in classrooms that I do think is worth considering, whether you do this or not, and whether it's a good idea or not. So this is what the teacher says. The learner says on Tuesday, and the teacher says, oh yes, on Tuesday. Good. Number 5, at 6 o'clock. And the teacher repeats, at 6 o'clock. Good. And the next. This is the kind of teacher echo that I'm talking about, that I'm suggesting is not good practice. Well, why not? There are different reasons why you might do this. I think one reason is that we often want to make the learner's answers audible. Perhaps the learner that we've asked didn't say it very loudly and we want the rest of the class to hear. So we get this kind of conversation. What's the answer number 4? Says the teacher, and the learner says, on Tuesday. Yes, on Tuesday. Good. So in this case, what the teacher's obviously trying to do is ensure that the rest of the class have 1, heard it, and 2, heard it in a good pronunciation model perhaps. But I think that there's a better thing to do here. If your learners are giving you very quiet answers, possibly because they're not very confident about their own answers, you could ask them to repeat it. You could ask them to repeat it again. You could gesture, just a hand behind the ear will usually do it. And I think if you get learners into the habit of saying things at a volume at which everybody else can hear, then that's better. And then if they don't say it correctly, then you can give them some correction. That's helpful for them. I think there are good reasons to get them to repeat answers so that they're audible to the rest of the class. Another reason that teachers might repeat learners is to help them correct themselves. So the teacher says, what did you do at the weekend? And the learner says, I go cinema. So the teacher says, oh, you went to the cinema. Now this isn't exactly echoing clearly, but it's what we call recasting, and it's very similar. This isn't clearly very natural language, it's very teachery language. And I think that there's a better way of doing this, which is when you get this kind of answer, which is clearly wrong, do it in this way. So this arguably is teacher echo, but here we're emphasising, you go cinema, we're emphasising the mistake that the learner's making there, and the learner can self-correct, hopefully. Another reason that I think teachers echo is just simply habit. It can be one of those things that you fall into, and I don't know why, but it's a very easy thing to fall into. And this follows something that's called IRF, which stands for Initiation, Response and Feedback. And this kind of pattern of interaction is very common in classrooms. Now, this isn't exactly the same as teacher echo, but there's a lot of crossover, I think, so it's worth mentioning at this point. So Tom Farrell, in his 2011 ITEFL plenary, which is available on iTunes and well worth a listen, uses this example to show what IRF is. So he says, somebody asks, what's the time? And somebody else says 10 to 2. At this point, it's a normal conversation. And then the first person says, good! At which point this becomes a teacher conversation. So we've got the I, the initiation, usually by the teacher, the response, usually by the learner, and the feedback, usually by the teacher. And this kind of thing means that what happens is the vast majority of the teacher talk in the classroom is taken up with the teacher talking. And you've got this feedback of good, which is not necessarily very authentic. It can lead to real problems. So Thompson, in his ELT journal article of 1997, it's quite old, but it's, I think, really worth bringing up. This was a genuine example of teacher interaction in the classroom. The teacher asked, what does your father do? So a trainee teacher. The learner gave him the answer, teacher. So the trainee, yeah, oh, he's a teacher. Again, we've got this repetition, this teacher echo thing, which I was talking about before. Good feedback. What does your father do to the next learner? And the next learner says, my father dead. At which point the teacher genuinely said, good! What about your father to the next learner? Now, clearly, this is really inappropriate, but I think it can get to that kind of IRF pattern where you don't really even listen to the learner's question or the learner's response. So what you need to think about is not the IRF, but to think about how you can further the interaction by getting the learner to speak more. So if you've got this kind of thing, what's the answer number 4 on Tuesday? And the teacher says, good, IRF. Or the teacher says, on Tuesday, teacher echo, good, IRF. This is not necessarily the best way to go about things, but better might be something like this. Okay, you get the answer. How do you know? So that we've got a bit more interaction from this answer. Here's another example. So your teacher question might be, have you ever eaten snails? To which your learners all grimace and say no. Well, instead of just saying good, perhaps then you ask some other questions like this. So the have you eaten snails question is what we call a closed question. There's really only 2 answers to that, yes or no. But these questions are open questions to which the learners can give much broader answers, encouraging them to be engaged more and to interact more, which is definitely what we want. So I hope that that's given you a couple of thoughts about teacher echo and about IRF. If you're already teaching, it's a really good idea to record yourself sometimes. Just audio record yourself. You can do it with a mobile phone, it's very easy. And just listen to yourself and see these kind of interaction patterns, and if you do use them, you might be surprised. And it's a really good reflective tool, I think, to listen to yourself and see what you say. It's not very comfortable always, but it is very useful. Anyway, I hope that that's been of some interest. and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much for listening. Bye bye.